All right, guys, so now that you know at least the basics of how to use the Fetch API and make a request, we're going to go ahead and build a very small project just to get used to it a little more. So we're going to build a random user generator, which is going to reach out to this API here, this public API at randomuser.me, and we're going to grab an image, a name, email, phone, location, and age, although the age seems to be pretty off. And this is not real information, it's just dummy data. Now, the way this API works, if we come down here, we need to send a request to this endpoint. Here they're using jQuery Ajax, but we're using the Fetch API. I don't see any reason why you would use jQuery for this, but to each his own. So they're just logging the data, and it's important to understand the data of any API you use. So in this case, it's an object that we're going to get back with a results array with an object in that array. Even if it's just one user that we're fetching, it's going to be inside of an array. So you need to keep that in mind when you're writing your code and dealing with data. So we get the gender, the name, which is an object, title, first, last, location, email, some dummy login data, the picture. So obviously you can pick and choose what you want from here. We're not going to use everything here, but if you wanted to, you could add it to this. So when we come to the page, it'll fetch a random user, and then when we click the button, you'll see it'll get another one, and we get a little spinner effect here as well when it's fetching the data. Now the background change, I made it so that if it's a male gender, it'll be this bluish color, and if it's a female gender, it'll be purple. So something they would do in like a dating app. All right, and that's really all there is to it. It's pretty simple, but I thought it was a cool project to just get our feet wet with the Fetch API. All right, now I'm going to get rid of all the JavaScript. I just wanted to show you how it worked. And once I do that, we have just a hard-coded user here, Sarah Wilson. The button no longer works. If we look at the HTML, I just have that data just hard-coded in the HTML. So basically what we want to do is fetch the data and replace everything inside of this div with the ID of user. So all this stuff, we want this to be dynamic from the API. Then we have our button. Inside the button, we have our spinner class, which is hidden by default. So we want to basically show that when we click the button and make the request, and then hide it again once we get the data back. All right, so let's jump into the JavaScript. And I also want to mention, if this seems too easy for you guys, then pause it and try to do it yourself without following along. And just, I'm sure that some of you can do this no problem. So instead of just skipping it, just do it on your own. It never hurts to have a refresher, even if it's stuff you already know. So first thing I'm going to do is let's just fetch the data. So we're going to create a function here called fetch user. All right, we want to call this just in the global scope. So we're going to call it right away because we want to fetch a user right away. And then we also want to have an event listener on the button, which we'll do after. But to fetch the user, we're going to use fetch, and that takes in the API URL or the endpoint that we want to hit, which is going to be randomuser.me and /API. So that's the endpoint. Now this is going to give us a promise, so we want to use the .then syntax. And remember, with the fetch API, our first .then gives us the response object. So we'll say res, and then we want to return res.json. And then whatever is returned from there, we can access in the next .then. So that's where we want to get the data. All right, and then we'll go ahead and just open up a code block here. So once we get the data, let's actually just console log it and see what we get. So I'm going to come over here, and you can see we get an object with a results array, just like the documentation showed us, with a single object, which is a user. All right, so to get the actual user object, it's going to be data, which it has a results array. So we want the first and only item in the array. So if I do that, then it just gets the user. All right, so what I'll do is I'll pass that into a function called display user. All right, and then let's create that function. So display user, and that's going to take in a user. And I want to be able to change the background based on the gender. So let's say if, and we'll say if the user dot gender is equal to female, then let's take the document dot body and change the style, and we want the background color and say Rebecca purple. And of course, if you want to use a different color, you can. I just picked whatever color. So let's say else, and then we'll change it to, let's say, steel blue, which is like a light blue. So we'll save that, and now we get a blue. Now this isn't going to change because we haven't put anything on the page, but depending on the color, that, I mean, we could even just do a console log right here of the user dot gender. So here you can see male. If I reload, male, female. Now I have the default color of the background, this purple. That's why when it's male, you can see it flashes for a second. Well, you can only see it flash if it's two males in a row. What we could do is we could set that to white, like BG white. But this is only when we reload. That's not going to happen when we click the button. But yeah, we'll just leave it white. All right, so now after we do the background thing, we're going to take the user element, which I'm going to bring in. We'll bring it in here. I think this is the only place we'll need it. So let's say const, we'll call this user display, and we want document dot, I'll just use get element by D, or let's use query selector. So query selector, and that has an ID of user. All right, so basically this right here, this div with the ID of user, I want everything inside of it. So this div to where that div ends. And what I'm going to do is just cut that because we no longer will need that. And we'll just have this empty div with the ID of user. All right, so I'll come over here, and then we're going to set the user display dot inner HTML. So we're kind of doing this the quick and dirty way, but it's such a small app, it doesn't really matter. And I'm just going to set the inner HTML and basically just paste this in as a template. And then we can just replace the items here, the hard-coded values with the dynamic data from the user. So we'll say user.name. Now remember, name is an object with first and last. So I want to get the first, and then we'll have a space, and then we'll do the user.name.last. If I save that, looks like it's not an English name. There we go. So you can see the name is going to change. All right, now let's actually hook the button up real quick before we finish this, just so we don't have to keep reloading the page. All we have to do is bring the button in. We'll say document.query selector, and that has an ID of generate. Let's make sure we put that there. And then we're going to add an event listener. We're going to listen for a click, and that's going to call fetch user. All right, so now if I click this, you can see the name changes as well as the background. Now we just need to replace the data for the rest of this stuff. Now the image, we want to get rid of this source here, and we want to put in the user, and then it has a picture object, and we want the large picture. So we're going to say large. So now you can see the images changes as well. So the image and the name are now dynamic. So now let's do the email. So this right here, we're going to replace that with user.email, and then the phone. So this will be, I think it's just user.phone. And then for the location, if we look at the response here, the location is going to be an object. And I just want to put the city. So it's location.city and location.country. So let's get rid of that, and let's say user.location.city, and then a space, and then we'll put the user.location.country. And then finally we have the age. Now the age is actually going to be in an object called DOB for date of birth, and then age. So we'll save that, and now, yeah, see the age is way off, 71. I don't think that guy's 71. I don't think that woman's 76, but you can see it is changing, and it's coming from the API. Now for the spinner, remember I want to show that little spinner, which is hidden right now. It has the class of spinner. So we'll create two functions, one to show the spinner, and for that we'll take the, let's say, document dot query selector, and it has a class of spinner, I believe. So we'll say class spinner, and we want to set the display or style display. So style dot display. If we want to show it, we want to set it to block. Okay, and then what I'll do is copy this, and we'll do a hide spinner. So hide spinner, and then we're just going to set that back to none. It doesn't show at the beginning when we load the page because it has hidden, which is a Tailwind class that sets it to display none. Now where we want to show the spinner is right when we make the request. I'm sorry, before we make the request. So right here in fetch user, let's say show spinner. And then we want to hide it once the data comes back. So right here we'll call hide spinner. Okay, so now if I click, you can see that it flashes on the screen for a second because it only is going to show when it's doing the actual fetching. So it just adds to the user experience. All right, and this does kind of go out of this, so we could change the width to, let's say, max width 2XL. Yeah, just so the data doesn't go out of the box. All right, and you'll probably already have this, like the BG white and this stuff here. But yeah, so that's it. Now we have a very, very small project, but it's using the Fetch API. We're able to get some data and show it on the screen and have a little dynamic background. So in the next video, we're going to start to talk about some of the options we can pass into the fetch function, such as the method, if we want to change the method to post or put, and some other things as well.